This is the College Hockey News Insiders Podcast.
Wilmer behind the back, spinorama, he scores! What a goal by Jeremy Wilmer!
Discussion.
Into the net with a shot, he scores! Owen Mike goes 4-2, Western Michigan.
Opinion.
Back into the near circle, fires, he scores! Hysteria here in Hockey Valley as Penn State upsets number 2 Minnesota.
Special guests and your listener questions.
The icing is waved and it's over! Western Michigan has won it. The Broncos are the Frozen Four champions of 2025.
Taking you through the world of college hockey, here are your hosts, Adam Roden and Mike McMahon.
All right, here we are another week on the College Hockey News Insiders podcast. And before we get to hockey, I got to say, that was one of the most tremendous and irritating World Series I've ever seen. So,
I had a blast watching it. I'm not too thrilled with the outcome, but...
Well, that's the problem. It's like, I equate it to a couple of things. Like, when the Cardinals beat the Rangers, I think it was like 2011 or 13, one of those years, where it was like that crazy comeback, like multiple times.
Yeah.
And
that
I
was what was it, the Josh Hamilton?
Yeah, and
was on that Rangers team.
David Freese, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, like, can't stand the Cardinals because, I mean, like, they're just so irritating. Well, at least in that era, they were just winning when they had no business to be. You know, so it was a great World Series, but I was like, eh. And it was the same thing here, you know. No, the other one I was going to say is ironically involving the Blue Jays as well, which was 93 when Joe Carter hit that home run. And, you know, everyone sees the highlight and goes, oh, my God, that's great. But I remember I was actually living in Philly at the time, and I'm not a Phillies fan, but I was like, this World Series is pathetic. Like, nobody can pitch. And, Mitch Williams came in, it was like batting practice. It was probably the most inevitable thing ever. So it was like I couldn't even be excited about it, honestly. So anyway, same thing here because like those are great games, but like no one wants the Dodgers to win unless you're a Dodger fan and you're now the evil empire like the Yankees used to be.
100%. And just, I mean, if I was a Blue Jays fan, I don't even know how I'd feel right now. I'd still be in recovery. I mean, to be 2 outs away. First of all, you give up the tying home run to Miguel Rojas. It's like, really? Of all the guys in that lineup, he's the one that stings you at the end. And then just not being able to score. Well, they had the bases loaded and 1 out in the 10th. Couldn't get a run across.
That was the 9th. Bottom of the 9th with the play at the plate, was like by a millimeter.
Yeah.
And if you, I don't know if you saw the picture, they showed the lead that the guy on third was taking. It was like not even very much off.
Yeah.
And like all he needed to do was like have an inch longer lead. He just scored. Oh my goodness. And then to go into the and then the next out in the 9th, the bottom of the 9th, was the one where freaking Pajes, who came in for like defense, slams into Kike Rodriguez.
Almost kills
Hernandez. And and I swear to God, I thought he was going to drop the ball. You know, and the other thing, too, on that replay at home plate on the second out that we were just talking about, can you imagine if the World Series ended on a replay?
I know. It's all. I was sitting with my son, Tyler. He was the only one awake. Owen had fallen asleep. And we were both like, even he's the one that actually realized, and he goes, this is going to be kind of anticlimactic if it's ruled that he's safe. Yeah. He's like, you're not going to, like, I guess it'd be a big celebration. He's like, but it's, it's not going to be this burst like it would have been, had he been called safe at the plate. I don't know what would have been worse, that or
the other way around.
Yeah, if they called him safe and then reviewed it and was like, no, actually he's out.
That would be brutal too. The freaking fans running on the field.
But I even go back to Game 6, like Bargers gets picked off at second to end the game, and it's like, I don't know why. There was clearly a short ball to left field. I don't know why he was so far off the bag. He's not going to score on a ball that's that short to left anyway. So I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you that far off the bag to begin with?
Kike Hernandez playing like 10 feet behind second base. I mean, I'll give him credit for that. But no, to bring this to hockey, because I am the segue king here. That ending with although it didn't turn out the same, but the replay reminded me of the 2009 regional game between Vermont and Air Force in
That's
Bridgeport, where the puck went through the net. And I had people, I mean, this is before ubiquitous use of cell phones, but I had people calling me, like, watching the game on TV, like, dude, that was in. It was like 2 more minutes until it was stopped. And I'm like, really? Because, like, no one in the arena noticed. And somehow they replayed it, and then, like, 10 minutes later, Vermont gets the Frozen Four. They go crazy.
Twitter did not exist yet.
No. Well, yeah, no, I don't think it did.
Not in 06. I want to say it was 09 maybe?
Well, the 09 was the year that we're talking about here, but it was right. I remember.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I got on Facebook in 08, and then Twitter, I was like just holding off. And the only reason I ever started was because everyone's like, you got to do it to send out tweets for College Hockey News. I'm like, all right, sure. So anyway, there you go. That was the World Series. We can get to hockey now because we're going to get Tim Dennehy on here in just a second. The people don't know him. He is the mastermind behind what was the pairwise and the new changes with the NPI. Now, he didn't necessarily invent the so-called pairwise, but he has been the committee's liaison for years in terms of helping them tweak things over the years and running numbers for them. And I think the NPI, that's some of the bigger changes that entails, he had more direct involvement with. But we'll talk to him about all of that. So we'll get a peek behind the curtain a little bit, and feel free to, if math and this stuff bores you, you can feel free to tune in next week, is all I can say. But try to make it as interesting as possible. But Northeastern is the team of the week, and last week we talked about them beating Denver, that big shot disparity, and Lawton Zocker coming up with a big game. But then they follow it up by sweeping Boston College. Now, we know Boston College is having some struggles here, but still, I don't know how much you saw of those games, but that was an impressive weekend. So Northeastern team of the week.
Yeah, and look, it was the Lawton Zocker show again, really, in those 2 games. He's been unbelievable so far. You look at just every single metric you can measure a goaltender. His numbers are off the chart. I was saying to somebody today, like, somebody goes, well, that level of play is unsustainable. And, like, yeah, it is. A .952 save percentage is unsustainable. But you know what? Like, it's such a short season. I don't know how far it's going to drop. I don't know how far the level of play is going to drop. And even if he's 85% of what he's been the last 2 weeks, he's still going to win you a lot of hockey games, like, with the way that he's played. And because of the short schedule, like, sometimes goalies can sustain an unsustainable level of play throughout the course of the season. Like, just look at Jeremy Swayman in Maine from, I think it was 2020. Yeah. I think it was. Like, they had their best year in a while, and it was really all on the heels of Jeremy Swayman, who I remember at that point in time we were saying the same things about, like, hey, it's unsustainable. We'll see when it breaks, and it never broke because he was that good, and it's a 34-game season, and it wasn't necessarily enough time for things to regress as much as they needed to. So he's been fantastic, and like I said, even if he isn't giving you .950 goaltending the rest of the way, I mean, geez, if he's 85% of what he was, he's still going to give you .920, and that's going to win you plenty of games.
Absolutely. So, yeah, kudos to Northeastern, our team of the week. Check out our article on collegehockeynews.com. Lots of else to talk about, especially this past weekend. We're waiting on Tim here, so I don't want to get too far along. There's a couple games going on right now as we speak. Harvard and Stonehill. Harvard up pretty good. I mean, it looks like Harvard might, have gotten themselves back together a nice roster here. We'll see. I mean, obviously a long way to go, but, they had a ton of talent in the last 5 years, and made the NCAAs a bunch of times. And then they all just kind of left at once, and it took them a couple years to recover. But they've got. We'll see. I mean, obviously just a couple games, but they've done a good job so far.
Yeah. Look, tying UConn on the road to open the year is not an easy place to play against a team that many people believe is going to be back in the tournament again. They certainly look that way, and held them to a goal. I mean, that's a pretty high-powered offense. So, no, they look good on Friday, and obviously only early in the second period, but look good so far tonight.
Yeah, 4-0. Ben Charette getting the second straight start. So I guess he's going to be the guy they run with here early on. Some of the big ones this past weekend, starting with the Big Ten, I mean, Wisconsin sweeping Minnesota. Obviously, Minnesota, like Boston College, having their struggles here early with a lot of new faces. So, Wisconsin, though, is back, shall we say? I don't know. I mean, last year at this time, they were struggling to score goals. And this year, I mean, they just put up 43 shots, and Minnesota scored 5. Christian Fitzgerald seems like, he's kind of back to being the way he was, the promise that he had. And so they have guys who at this point, Quinn Finley, of course, he's doing it again, and Simon Tassi. I mean, 2 of those guys came from Minnesota State, right, and then did not put up great numbers at first with Mike Hastings, but now they seem to be maybe it all coming together.
Yeah, they look good so far. Obviously, Minnesota has struggled, which is another part of that story, but they outscored them 9-2. Like, if this is a Minnesota team that we think is going to struggle, and they've struggled so far, they did to that caliber of team what you would expect a good team to do, and that's outscore them 9-2 over 2 games. So yeah, they're running a little bit of the Big Ten gauntlet here coming up. So I'm going to be curious to see what it looks like when we get through to the end of the month, right before Thanksgiving. They're at Michigan and at Michigan State in 2 out of the next 3 weeks, and they have Ohio State at home. So they're really kind of getting into the meat of the Big Ten right now, starting this weekend at Michigan, which is no easy place to go play with the way the Wolverines look right now. So, it seems as they're going to be right near the top of the Big Ten in that mix anyway. With the way that they've started so far. But, I'm really curious to see what the next 3 weeks look like, because this is a real big test, these next 6.
Yeah, and I mean, the goalie obviously is, as always, a big story, but Daniel Hauser coming from Major Junior is obviously been huge. I mean, he's got a .940 save percentage, 1.35 goals against. He played for Calgary and Wenatchee last year. He had played for 3 different WHL teams. And, a smaller goalie by today's standards at 5'11", so maybe that's why he's never drafted. But so far, so good there. That's probably as big as anything, but that's not been stable.
No, and not a knock on him here, but as a freshman, a guy that you might be able to hang on to for at least 3 years, if not more, because of the size. Like, I don't know that NHL teams are going to be running to sign a 5'11" goalie. You don't see a lot of those guys. Now, if he puts up ridiculously eye-popping numbers, then somebody's going to roll the dice on him, just because goals are hard to come by. But it seems anyway that he's a guy you might be able to hang on. Now, we're 8 games in, but he could kind of solidify that position for the next couple of years for them.
Trying to see the Maine BU series was kind of bonkers. I mean, Maine came back on Friday and won in overtime, and then Saturday's game was 8-6 or 8-5.
8-5, yeah.
I mean, as much as that was fun to watch, BU, another one of these teams early on. Now, they lost 8-4 to UConn last week and then bounced back and won 3-1, right? So you thought, okay, maybe they figured it out. Well, then they come back with 13 goals allowed the next week. You didn't. I know that we expected some, I guess, transition time here for BU, but you thought the goalie at least could, with Yegorov, would, be enough back there to avoid some of this stuff, and that has not been. And I don't necessarily want to blame him, because they've been a tire fire on defense, but .887 save percentage. You thought maybe he'd stop a few, and he got pulled in Saturday's game after 12 minutes, allowing 3 goals on 8 shots.
Yeah, no, he has struggled defensively. They have struggled. I mean, that's it. And I think last year, I don't know that they were really like a beacon of defensive hockey a year ago either. Yeah, so he definitely had bailed them out at times, right? But because I looked at this earlier today, we have this on the site on College Hockey News on the advanced analytics page for the teams. He faced last year 38%, almost 39% of the shots he faced were from the high danger area. He had an .802 save. This is this year. Almost 39% of the shots he's faced have come from the high danger area with an .802 save percentage on those shots. That's Yegorov. You look back to last year, he faced 33.5% of his shots from the high danger area, and he had an .878 save percentage on those shots. So both numbers are worse. The save percentage is more significantly worse, 878 to 807. I mean, that's a big drop. But he's still also facing, roughly 5% more of the shots he's faced have come from the high danger area. So both numbers have trended in the wrong direction. They're giving up more high danger area shots, and he's stopping less of them. So
right.
It's been both ends of it for sure.
And that's good to point out. And by the way, you can find all of that stuff on College Hockey News. Individual team, if you go to their stats page, there's this drop down for different stat types. That's the advanced stat page, so you can see that stuff. But yeah, it's important to know because, like you say, it could be a complete tire fire defensively, and he's facing more, like you said, more high danger shots, and that's why his save percentage goes down. But like you said, if his save percentage on the high danger shots is lower, that's also, an indicator that's it's on the goalie as well. So.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Matthew Caron last year, who ended up losing his job to Yegorov, was .846 against high danger shots. So he's struggling, and and so they're struggling defensively too. That said, though, we saw enough of him last year that I don't expect that this is going to continue. I think he's in a slump. Players go through slumps. I think he's had a tough start to the year, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to get it figured out. They're going to defensively get things figured out because we saw almost 20 games last year of really solid play out of him and carried them to the Frozen Four in the national championship game. So I think they're going to figure it out. I just don't know when is that going to be. I mean, their schedule is not exactly easy coming up here. I mean, they got a Merrimack team that's 500 so far, has played up and down. They've got on the road at Quinnipiac the week after that, and then Northeastern. I mean, they could play really well against Northeastern and still not find the win column if Zakers played the way that he's played the last couple of weeks, as we just talked about. So, and then they got red hot hockey against Cornell. So it's like you're BU, you're not really going to play an easy schedule, and they're going to have to figure it out against some pretty tough competition over the next month.
Well, yeah, and the one goalie who we haven't talked much about, who is lighting it up, when you look at some of the advanced numbers, is Simon Latkozy on Omaha. And just swept Colorado College on the road. I mean, the second game was 5-4, but nevertheless, I mean, with a lot of new faces there as well, he's kept his team in games. Now, his numbers, aren't, like, off the charts as far as, like, goals against that. You see the discrepancy, though. I mean, .925 save percentage, 2.82 goals against. That means he's facing a lot of shots. And he's got the highest amount of saves above expected of anybody in the country right now. So that's keeping him in games.
Oh, yeah, because his numbers, I mean, you want to talk about bad defense. His numbers against high danger chances is off the charts. He's faced almost 60% of his shots have come from high danger areas. It's crazy.
Yeah.
57.6%.
That's bonkers.
It's a ridiculous number. That's absolutely bonkers. And he's got a .934 save percentage against those shots.
And that's why his expected, number is so high.
Yeah, his expected save percentage is .874.
Yeah.
And he's got a .925.
That is, yeah. So that tells you right there. It'd also be nice if you had a little help. But we'll see if they can get that rounded into shape. All right, listen, we got to transition here to our next guest. We'll do that when we come right back.
Class, today we're talking men's ice hockey. Open your textbooks. Join thousands of other screaming fans for an in-person experience you have to see to believe. It's the NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas. Attendance is encouraged. Passion is mandatory. Buy your seats today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4.
How many teams are in the Men's Frozen Four?
Please leave.
Let's get to our next guest here, Tim Donahue, who is the man behind the curtain there, the Wizard of Oz, who you don't know, probably his name, of course. But we're going to geek out. I told you, if anyone wants to, we'll try to make this as entertaining as possible. But if anyone wants to just skip to next week's show, feel free. As we talk about some math with Tim Donahue. Tim, I've known you for, 30 years? I don't know. This started out, I think you had a rating system in the 90s that was based upon score differentials as well, wasn't it? So
I don't remember. Oh yeah, I guess we did do one that was score differentials. I did one with one of the professors at St. Lawrence that was
right
predictive in that.
Where'd that ever go? I guess that was something that the hockey community wasn't really interested in, like integrating score differences into like rating systems, I guess, huh?
Well, it depends. Hockey community or NCAA.
Well, I guess what I mean, the coaches.
Yeah.
Which is all that matters, right?
Right.
I mean, there is a pro and con to doing something like that.
I don't think there's any value add
in
going to score differentials, really in any NCAA sport. It opens a can of worms. You can, they have, we'll cap it at such and such and whatever, but it still causes more problems than it solves. And the data tells us it doesn't really give us anything, especially in a sport like hockey where you're really just interested in the outcome, and score differential is not there. So
I would certainly agree with that. But all right, so let's. So as I was telling people earlier when you weren't here, I mean, it's not. You didn't necessarily invent the pairwise. I mean, it was kind of around. It wasn't necessarily called what it was called. I mean, I've done zillion stories on the whole lineage of that. But you were the sort of the overseer and the helper liaison for the committee for many years, helping them through many changes, tweaks. We'll get to that later. All the fun we had with the pairwise we're going to miss. But just talk about the origins a bit of the NPI, which you were more instrumental, I guess, in helping usher in and essentially help make the committee feel better, I guess, is probably a good way to put it, as to transitioning to that, right?
Yeah. So, the RPI has actually been around in the NCAA longer than you or I have been around. Right. Quite a bit longer. The RPI first started in 1982 when it was used for basketball. And remarkably, it's still used kind of in exactly the same way in a lot of other NCAA sports at the Division I level. That this 25, 50, 25, right? We're going to get into some numbers here tonight, and that's the 25% win percentage, 50% opponents win percentage, 25% opponents win percentage. That's the way it started in 1982, and it still exists in that form in some other sports. But it's evolved, and there's a lot of problems with those numbers, and that's why those of us that remember way back in college hockey, going all the way back to last year, we used a different RPI. We used a 25, 21, 54, which is kind of crazy sounding numbers, but those numbers kept kind of things more in alignment.
I think that came around in like 2005 or so, maybe, I want to say. I don't know.
I'd have to go refer to your page, that almanac with the changes. That's what I always have to go back to and look at to see when these changes exactly occurred to do that. Because when you think about it, like on that 25, 50, 25, right? If you play a winless team, you're taking a 0 on 50% of you. Think about it. It's a 3-part quiz you're taking, right? Part 1 counts 25%. You control that. You win, you get 100%. That's 25 points. Part 2 is that opponent's win percentage. You play a winless team, you're taking a 0 there, right? And your ceiling for that game becomes a 50 right off the bat.
Right.
When you play that game, 50 is not going to get you anywhere in the big picture.
None of us who had any sort of math sense, I guess, ever liked the RPI, but it was like the best anyone would go along with because it was NCAA approved, right, since the 70s and 80s.
Correct. And the NPI is an evolution of the RPI. And what we're doing there, so let's just stop for a moment and think about what that RPI is doing, right? It assigned every team in college hockey, every team in every sport, whichever one we're talking about, was assigned a rating number. And, we could have, you can use that number. As we know, that RPI number really became, the overriding part of the pairwise criteria. It was actually pretty rare for teams to shift spots away from their RPI position. But within the internal mechanics of that RPI, there was some inconsistencies, right? So you had a number. If your RPI was 60, right, and I played you, I need to know something about what you mean towards my strength of schedule. Well, I didn't do anything with that 60, right? You had that number staring right at me. The New York City Marathon was this past week, and I've used this analogy a lot.
Yeah.
Whatever everyone's rating is, it's like imagine they're just wearing it as a bib number right in front of them, right? And I should be able to look and see, okay, here's, Adam has a RPI of 60 and Mike has an RPI of 50. And so I know that Adam ranks ahead of Mike.
Right. That sounds about right.
If I play either of you, I wasn't using that number for anything, right? I was ignoring it.
Yeah.
I was instead looking at your win percentage. Your win percentage is my opponent's win percentage.
Right.
Your opponent's win percentage is my opponent's win percentage if I play you. And I was calculating some other number and using that for my strength of schedule calculations. And the 25, 21, 54, which is, again, funny sounding numbers, was designed to kind of help put that things in correlation, such that if Adam's RPI is higher than Mike's, I should get more strength of schedule credit for playing Adam than I should get for playing Mike. The original NCAA RPI was very poor at doing that. The RPI we just used was better at doing that, but it wasn't perfect. You still had these situations depending on exactly how a team fell in terms of where their win percentage and their opponent's win percentage fell, that your RPI might be higher than Mike's, but if it was close and Mike's, depending if Mike had a little more oomph on that, on his strength of schedule and less on his win percentage, maybe he was worth more to me playing for an opponent than you were, right? So there's that inconsistency. You might rank number 25 in the RPI, Mike ranks number 30, and yet conceivably I could get more strength of schedule credit for playing.
And RPI generally did an okay job, right? But it was just prone to issues, and it was somewhat arbitrary, those numbers.
Sure.
So we're helping, I guess, by moving towards something that's more.
Right.
So your strength of schedule component is based upon your opponent's NPI now, which might sound counterintuitive to some people, because how do you know what that is until you've calculated it, and how do you know your own until you? So we're not going to go too deep in the weeds on the math of that, but I mean essentially it's an iterative formula that it has to run through itself, usually around 30 times or so to stabilize. And I don't know if you have any better way of explaining that than I do, but it works out. Let's put it that way.
Right. And going back, without getting into the weeds of the math, intuitively it should make sense.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's NPI, RPI, QPI, ZPI, whatever PI you want to call it. Okay. If your rating, your value is out there for the world to see, and I've decided that, this rating is going to be the method, by which, if in pairwise a big part of the method, or if in an NPI only world, the only method by which I'm going to rank teams, why would I want to use anything other than that number for strength of schedule calculations, right? An NPI immediately solves that problem. If your NPI is higher, if Adam's NPI is higher than Mike's, then Adam is worth more towards my strength of schedule than Mike's. Full stop.
Yep. And like I said, I want to bounce around a little bit, and I ask you this because you and I agree that the people who make up the committee are coaches, administrators that we all respect. I've written a zillion articles over the years defending them from all sorts of stupid, accusations here and there. So, but my point is, though, it did take, a number of years to sort of make everyone feel good about that transition. I don't think that's not a knock on them. I'm just curious if you could talk about like the process of bringing them along, I guess.
It's very much to their credit. So let me particularly point out, the NCAA championship manager, Chad Tolliver, the current committee chair, Tim Trowell from Harvard, and also the former chair who's rotated off the committee now, Jeff Shulman of Vermont, really did a lot of legwork and went back, through the AHCA, through the conference representatives of the committee to just make sure there was education and understanding on this.
Right.
Hockey, and it was never by design. And you were been around long enough. It kind of just evolved to that point where, okay, we're on the pairwise. That's it. We're running on math.
Yeah.
And you're never going to find, okay, here was the moment where the college hockey community and the NCAA decided we're doing this strictly by math. It just kind of happened.
I've written about this so many times, that evolution, that slow process, and how it all came to be. So, yes.
Right. And every now and then somebody will say, well, maybe we should think about, looking at, they were missing certain player this time. And we should bring in some kind of elements. And
I was going to get to that, but go ahead.
Yeah, and no one seems too interested in going down that road. Generally, those who have brought up that idea have been quieted down quickly.
Yeah.
And so in a world where that's the case, you really got to make sure you're using the best math you can. And that's what we were doing the past number of years with that RPI, right? The NCAA, by whatever policies that were in place, they said, well, RPI's got to be part of your selection criteria, but we'll let you change those numbers. And we did that in ice hockey. Again, I'd have to go back to
a zillion times. Yes, tweaks here and there. Not just the RPI, but all the other criteria.
Right. But they said the RPI's got to be part of it.
Right.
You can go change those numbers. So we changed them to those numbers that made a little bit more mathematical sense, even if they intuitively don't. But nobody's going to sit down and say this 25, 21, 54 is the ideal rating system, because it wasn't. Right. And in my conversations with coaches and commissioners and administrators, a frequent question is, are we using the best math we can? Right. My answer for many years were, well, we're using the best math we can, in that the NCAA says we got to use an RPI, and we've kind of, duct taped it as best we could to make it do what we want to do. But then once basketball started moving to the net rating, the door was kind of opened, to look at other things. I'm like, okay, let's look at this thing that makes sense. We should point out, maybe you're going to get to this later, there's no such thing as the NPI, right? There's still a lot of subjectivity that goes into the specific parameters of that.
Yeah, actually, I'll probably not get into as much of that here, because we're going to, it's going to be on the website, same way I had for the pairwise. We're going to explain all the particulars of it. So I don't think we need to, but like you said, safe to say that there's weightings to this, that, and the other thing. We'll get into some of it, but that every sport can do a little bit differently, right?
And every sport should do a little bit differently. There's nuances in other sports. It depends how concentrated a sport is in terms of what percentage of the contests are played in conference versus intra-conference. Hockey has a very specific nuance. Ice hockey is the only sport that kind of, has that overtime adjustment.
Yeah, right.
In every other NCAA sport, as far as the criteria is concerned, a win is a win, a loss is a loss. It doesn't matter if it was in overtime, extra innings, what have you. Hockey, with the 3-on-3 overtime in the regular season, has had that adjustment in there ever since that became part of the playing rules. And that was somewhat conditional on that going. There was a lot of chicken and egg business there when the 3-on-3 was coming in about, well, okay, we can get on board with the 3-on-3 if and only if it doesn't count as a full win and a full loss.
Right. And so that has been tweaked over the years. And like I said, there's a million more tweaks. I'm not going to get into all the math of that. I was just programming it today. But you mentioned how no one's really had the stomach for things like, a recency bias. I mean, there used to be way back in the day with the last 16 and all that component to the pairwise. That's out the window. But there is still the quality win bonus is still a philosophical addition. I mean, it's not necessarily based in any sort of math. You have to philosophically say, I want to give a bonus to teams that beat good teams, because you could just as easily say, well, they lost to bad teams, so so it all balances out. But that is part of it, and once you make that determination, every sport can handle it differently as to how much weight they want to put on that, right?
Exactly. And if let's say I've got two teams coming into my building on the weekend. I've got the number 1 team in the country and the number 63 team in the country are both coming into my arena on the weekend. Strictly from a strength of schedule, win percentage standpoint, if I split with them, it doesn't matter how I split, right? I mean, you would imagine I'm going to probably lose to number 1 and beat number 63. But if I somehow manage to do it the other way around, beat number 1 and lose to number 63, from a strictly strength of schedule win percentage standpoint, that it doesn't matter. The quality win bonus would give me a little credit, say, hey, somehow, this guy beat number 1, put a little extra emphasis on that win against the number 1 team to do that, which is, it's the successor to various NCAA criteria. To our old favorite, the record versus teams under consideration.
That's right.
Our fond memories of the
We're
cliff.
going to miss the Tuck Cliff. We'll get to that. Mike remembers that too.
Oh, yeah.
So Mike has given me permission to dominate this conversation, by the way, so don't worry about it. But I did want to, before I get back to some of those things we just mentioned, Cratch is the goofy word that has been an acronym that no one really knows what it means, but the first two letters the first letter stands for a guy named Ken who just brought these ratings into hockey because he was a professor, I think, at Notre Dame or something. I might be getting that wrong. But it has to do with a mathematical concept of, this iterative kind of formula that the NPI is using to some extent. And, for 20 years when the RPI was so bad, I was always advocating to use that because it was certainly better than the RPI in a lot of cases. So the fact that the NPI sort of introduces an iterative approach, I guess, to figuring out your strength of schedule is very similar in that regard to how the Cratch does it. So I wanted to just, as layman's terms as possible, tell us why that is still not perfect, I guess, for hockey, and how the NPI would be better than Cratch. Because to me, Cratch has always seemed like the most pure way to do it. It's always hard for me to articulate, but essentially, if you played out your schedule, your Cratch rating essentially versus the other team's Cratch rating and put that all together, the odds of you winning, it comes out to what your actual winning percentage was, which makes it kind of pure in that regard.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of mathematical beauty in that if you as you keep updating the numbers, then you can kind of back calculate,
right?
What were my expected wins? What were my chances of winning every game? And add those all up. It's going to add up to how many wins you actually have. Right, so there's some merit in that. The problem is, and that system works great if you have, we have 63 teams in college hockey. If you've got 63 teams and each one has a random 34 games against the other 63 teams, that's going to work great. That's not how the world works, right? We've got these big clusters called conferences of teams playing highly concentrated. College hockey is pretty high in the percentage of games played intra-conference. And there's a lot of factors that go into how those non-conference games play out. And so the problem with a system like the Cratch is it can get really, really skewed, especially when, not all non-conference games are created equal, and it can get really, really skewed in terms of that. And, you've seen this before. This will show up. You can often look at women's hockey. I know you've run those numbers on your site as well for women's hockey. And there's, if you look at the WCHA, if it has a really good year, they're having a really good year this year. You can get into situations where the bottom team in one of those conferences is like, hey, wait a minute, this team is really ranked,
and they're
quite
like
a bit
15th in the Cratch.
Yeah. So something
like that.
And it, again, kind of touching back on, we'll probably do this a few times in this conversation, bouncing around on some of these subjects. It takes out of the hands of the committee or whoever the decision makers are, where those balances should be. How you could adjust it to say, well, we're going to put some extra home away emphasis. You could build that into the Cratch. You could do the overtime thing. Right. You can do all those things, but it really, at the end of the day, those numbers are going to run and kind of settle themselves. And under the NPI, the committee can still set that balance of that most important balance of win percentage versus strength of schedule.
Right.
In a lot of other NCAA sports, win percentage is kind of one criteria and strength of schedule is another. And if, talk to people who've been on those committees, they're up into the wee hours of the morning, having those debates,
right.
Taste great, less filling, chocolate or peanut butter, Pepsi or Coke. And you could go on all night with those things.
Yeah. I mean, they're not math majors though, right? I mean, that's what they got you for. So to have some semblance of viability to it, right?
There's no, I guess circling back, there's no answer key on this. There's nobody can look at this and say this ranking of teams is correct. They can find a ranking that concurs with their own opinion. If there was an answer key, we'd use the answer key. What, the college hockey community has been using is they've come to some consensus where it's accepted. If whether it's the pairwise or the new NPI, or if things looked really crazy to somebody, they would say, hey, what's going on here? We need to fix this.
Yeah.
As that's not the case.
Right. And, it's as long as everyone knows it in advance of a season, and it's not tinkered with. I think everyone can accept that, and it's better than the alternative, which is having people come up with willy-nilly opinions to figure these things out. But that always brings me to my argument against home ice NCAA regional games. I think last time I talked to you about this, you were like coming around to not worrying about it. But that always bothers me, just because I do think that the math formulas to pick the teams is better than the alternative, and I wouldn't want to do away with that. But to use an imperfect math to determine home ice is an advantage, as whatever that advantage may be, whether it's 55% or whatever. That who's to say 7, 8, 9, 10 is in the right order, right? So that's what always bothers me, because as we're talking here, you as you say, and I agree. Like I get this comment all the time, like, oh, if you didn't like the math so much, why are we using this system? It's like, we're not saying that. Like, it's good enough, right? Yeah. But it's not that good, and it never can be that good. It's impossible. You're only dealing with 34 game sample sizes and splitting hairs on hundredths of points, right? So anyway, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but that's where I stand on why I. Now,
well,
of course,
my opinion doesn't matter. I mean,
no, it doesn't, and neither does mine. But that's why we have these shows.
Yeah, and there's a reason. There's a reason why this has been talked about for 15 plus years. Pretty much since the NCAA went to the current 16-team format, it's been talked about. And the reason is there's a valid argument on both sides, right? That you brought up the argument about how we need those neutral site games to kind of balance it out and give everyone that fair shot. The counter argument is, hey, if this math is good enough to select the teams, if 0.0001 points is good enough to be the difference between in the tournament or out of the tournament, then it's good enough to also determine who should host, 4 regionals or 8 first-round games or whatever. And, my own thoughts on that
I hear you.
are going to stay my own
These
thoughts.
are the conversations I have with David Carl. The thing is, the coaches don't, or even most people in general, don't really know. Like, I would have less of a problem if everyone just admitted that, the math is imperfect, but we're going to do this anyway because there are other advantages to it, like, atmosphere and that kind of thing, rather than saying, hey, we're using the math, so we've got to go by the math. No, I mean, that's my soapbox. But let me get moving on to just the last thing I want to talk, because I don't want to go on all night, even though I could. The last, sort of esoteric point to talk about is just what we were just talking about, the home ice advantage, which in the RPI, there was, I don't know when was this introduced, somewhere in 2000s, the home road weighting of 1.2, 0.8 for home road, blah, blah, blah. Now, this year with the NPI, that's mostly intact, but for postseason tournament games, they changed it so that's equal weighting, which is one thing. And also there was a tweak, which, and again, I'm going to get in the weeds on with the overtime, where just the regulation portion of that game is counted with the weighting, but the overtime portion is not. So little things like that. So anyway, just what's the sentiment right now with the 1.20? Because as we know, 60% is a little high for a home ice advantage. It's probably around more like 55 or 54, just depending on what you do. But I mean, that wasn't necessarily, as I was trying to point out to somebody, that wasn't necessarily the intention. It wasn't supposed to be like a number that is like very accurate every year. It was more so to try to encourage larger programs to play road non-conference games, right?
Yeah, and that's the reason. That's the reason it went into the RPI. I believe it was 2013. I think it went in the same year the Big Ten and the NCHC started.
Right.
And the committee felt that those numbers should stay in place for exactly those same reasons. Encourage teams. The 1.2 and the 0.8, again, without getting to the weeds of how the math works, essentially it means, if I win on the road or lose at home, that's going to be the overweight. It's going to count as 1.2 wins or 1.2 losses. If I win at home or lose on the road, it's going to have that underweight of 0.8. Right. 0.8 wins at home or 0.8 losses on the road. So if I choose to stay at home, I'm assuming more risk, right? I'm assuming the risk of 1.2 losses if I lose only able to get 0.8 wins if I win. If I go on the road, I'm minimizing my risk. Right? I'm capped at 0.8 losses, but I can get 1.2 wins. So either teams, accept that motivation to go, or if they choose to stay at home, they deal with however the math impacts them. So the committee, again, that 1.2 and 0.8 was part of the RPI we've been using, and the committee. I don't want to speak for them. I know you spoke with Scott Sandelin last week, and you can talk to other committee members. I don't want to speak for them too much on their decisions, but to the extent that had been in place with that same weighting, the 1.2 and 0.8 across the board, they felt comfortable keeping that for the regular season games, both conference and non-conference. The playoffs, as you mentioned, this is something that came up a couple years ago.
We've talked to Chris Mayotte, who was the first that I heard talking about it on this show. So, Michael, remember, we were like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And the committee, I think that speaks to how the committee really, took everything into consideration coming from the membership. And at the end of their process, again, go talk to the committee members. They felt that placing that neutral weight on playoff games, what it really did was give all the conferences the freedom to pick the format that works best for them, on campus, off campus, to not have that be a factor for those conferences as they're all kind of wrestling with what their best playoff format should be to do that. Now, yes, if games are played on campus, it's still, that home ice advantage still exists in the playoffs. It's still more difficult for that road team to win in that home team's building. Right. But kind of leveling that at the 1.0, it certainly doesn't. They didn't want to disadvantage teams for earning. If you look at kind of your games, your conference games are assigned. In certain conferences, it's a full round robin, so it doesn't matter. It balances out. In others, there can still be an imbalance there if the conference is not playing a full round robin. Right? Your conference games are assigned. Your non-conference games are chosen, but your playoff games are earned. Right? And by kind of putting, saying, okay, you're the home team, I'm only going to let you win 0.8, for a game that you earned, for a home game you earned. There's a lot of merit in that. Yeah. And I credit the committee for doing a lot of homework. And speaking with the membership on that.
Well, last but not least, I always have coaches ask me, I get this all the time, maybe not as much anymore, because I think I've, slapped them all down on it. But, should we schedule tougher teams or easier teams? Can you game this, or they're complaining about somebody else who's not scheduling this. And I'm always like, it doesn't make a difference. Maybe 0.0005 somewhere someone could say, oh, look, it made a difference. But generally speaking, my answer is always it doesn't really matter. So, because obviously it's a harder opponent, but if you win, you get more out of it. A lesser opponent, you win. It's easier to win, but you don't get as much out of it. It balances out. Maybe not perfectly, but that's always my answer. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've been getting this question as long as I've been doing this. My response, thankfully, has generally been the same, and it's even more so now in an NPI world. My answer to the coach is schedule the best teams you think you have a reasonable chance to beat. Right? If you're a bottom 20% team and you don't think you have any chance to beat a top 10 team, then you probably shouldn't go play them unless, speaking strictly from the NPI ratings, there's other, I'm not going to get into the other factors. Right. Whatever guarantee you're getting or paycheck.
Or just learning situations or whatever. There's other reasons to want to do it.
Right. And this is a very difficult thing to do because
that's the other thing.
You're scheduling 2 or 3 years out for your non-conference. You don't know how good your opponents are going to be, let alone how good you're going to be. Everybody thinks they're going to be good and hopes they're going to be good. To schedule teams you think you have a reasonable chance to beat. If you're a top tier program, if you're a program that thinks you're on the cusp of potentially being in the NCAA tournament, don't schedule number 63 in the country, because chances are that there's a chance that could end up being a quote unquote bad win that would just kind of wipe off your schedule anyway. Now that playing that team doesn't negatively impact you, right? We're not going to think you are worse for going out and playing that weak team, but you've paid an opportunity cost there, right? Instead of you went and played number 63 and beat them, and we said, okay, well, you know that game was worth a 52, and your NPI
you could play 20. You could play 22 and lose. So
you could.
You know, that hurts you more than playing 63 and winning, right? So
you could, but if at the end of the year you're that first team out of the NCAA tournament and you played number 63 for 2 games, wouldn't you have rather, you know, played number 22 and had a chance to, you know, to win those games and play yourself into the tournament? I think.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
You'd have to run the numbers, but the bottom line though is stop worrying about it, right? That's what I always tell everybody. It's just no way to know. So anyway, I just had to get that out of the way. So I do appreciate it. The only thing I was going to say is, are you going to miss any of the pairwise shenanigans? There really weren't a lot of them in the last few years after we got rid of all those other criteria. But you mentioned the tuck cliff, which was probably the height of absurdity back in, I think, 2006 when Bentley, no offense to them, but like there were situations where I can't even remember right now, but you know, losing was helping teams and just crazy stuff like that, right? So
yeah, I mean,
it made our lives more interesting. You got to admit.
It did, and you and I have been around the business long enough to know that there's always going to be crazy questions out there, which is fine. And the problem is if there's crazy answers, you know. Right. And when the question is, should I consider losing this game to help my position? You know, if our answer is, you know, yes or even maybe, then that should give us pause and be there. And again, just for a large part of the audience that doesn't even remember this, you know, it was if record versus teams under consideration it was defined in all sorts of various ways over the course of time. Top 20, top 25, teams over 500 in the RPI. At one point, just teams with a 500 or better record.
The shining example on that is so you're playing a team where you are like 4-0 against them and they're in the top 25, but if you beat them, they'll drop out of it and you'll lose those 4 wins. Right. And so so you want to lose to them. So you're 4-1, which is still pretty good, and they stay in there. That's the gist of it.
Right. You're almost more willing to sacrifice a hit on your RPI in order to keep that 4-1 on your record versus teams under consideration, and that was the classic problem. And that's why we got rid of that. That's where that that quality win bonus comes in as a successor. So no, I'm not going to miss that at all. We look again. And just to be clear, the RPI was one component of the pairwise. The NPI kind of replaces the RPI, but also the other components of the pairwise have gone away. We're now going RPI only. If you look last year, we looked. This was one that got a lot of attention. Ohio State ended up number 10 in the pairwise in the RPI. Princeton was number 44, and yet Princeton won that pairwise comparison. Right? Princeton, to their credit, had a great weekend, swept Ohio State in 2 games. They had no common opponents. So even though there was a massive RPI gap between those 2 teams, that RPI gap is only worth 1 point, or, it would be the tiebreaker, but that didn't come into play. Princeton's 2 head-to-head wins, no common opponents for them. Princeton wins that pairwise comparison. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. No disrespect to Princeton. And it wouldn't have mattered. I ran it with Princeton losing every other game they played that year, other than those 2 against Ohio State, and Ohio State winning every other game.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. Completely irrelevant.
Princeton still wins the comparison, right? So that's the kind of thing that.
Well, we did away with most of those, but that was the only thing left at the end of the day. Was that really? Yeah,
and it goes back to the question: are we using the best math we can? And when you have math that says that, it's worth reviewing and saying, hey, does this actually make sense?
Yep. All right, brother. Well, I appreciate this. We're freaking old. I've known you for 30 years, so there you go. I think it's probably met you first time with some chilly night in Appleton somewhere in 1995 or so.
It marches on, yes.
Get hurt in a game? We tough it out. Feel exhausted? We push on. Feeling down? We pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. But there are times when bootstraps aren't enough. When stress gets to us and we need to talk to someone about what we're really going through. So we're going to reach out, because sometimes mental health is not a one-person job. Visit loveyourmindtoday.org. That's loveyourmindtoday.org. Brought to you by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ad Council.
All right, welcome back here to the College Hockey News Insiders podcast. That was, again, Tim Danahy, the mastermind behind the transition from pairwise to NPI. And as he said, the committee had to be fully invested and understand it all, and he gave them credit for that. So it's going to be interesting. I think last week, by the way, I misspoke when I was talking about the overtime weightings, because I think I had it backwards. I said that they wanted to get away from the idea that you could win a game in overtime at home and get penalized. But that actually was the case originally with the 55-45. They changed it a few years ago to 2/3, 1/3. That has been the way it's been. And they thought that was basically an overshoot. So now it's 60-40. That's the bottom line on that. And they're like I alluded to in there, there's some little esoteric things which Tim has been pointing out to me recently, that they went to it so that the overtime itself will not count. That the home road weighting is out the window in overtime, because they did a study on the 3-on-3 and found that it was basically 50-50 home and away.
Oh, that's interesting.
So basically the home and away weighting will only count towards the tie portion of the game in the regulation, and then overtime is essentially neutral. I mean, you're talking about tiny percentage points difference in how it goes, but could make a difference. You never know. We've seen it.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, you never know.
I do, something like we have Cratch. We call our power ratings. So it's essentially the College Hockey News power ratings powered by Cratch, which is really just a goofy acronym that came around a long time ago in hockey that everyone in hockey has kind of used. But I still think that's a great system. So we use it to power our chip ratings when we're determining strength of schedule and balancing player statistics to determine our Hobie tracker and our probability matrix, where we for odds of winning a particular game, still using that. We're kind of working on other methodologies where we'll have that recency bias. I mean, that's really a philosophical argument, but and it was never really. There's never really a good way to do it with the pairwise and the RPI, but I think with the Cratch, we're trying to figure out a way to have some sort of bias towards more recent games, essentially.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, yeah. There's all these – the math people are hard at work behind the scenes there in College Hockey News. So, we'll see how this goes, In the past, we've always talked about how the pairwise, some people would be like, what are you doing posting the pairwise? And this early in the year, but it really did tell you a pretty good picture by the middle to late November, and we're going to see. This is the first test now this year whether the NPI can do the same thing, right?
Yeah, Thanksgiving, that was always what we used with the pairwise, was Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
so.
And it's true in the NHL too. I mean,
exactly. Yeah,
teams who are in playoff positions, 75% make the playoffs, and in this case, the NCAA tournament. So,
yep.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's what it is. So, all right. Quickly, let's get into some listener questions. All right. Caleb asks, besides Quinnipiac, who in the ECAC has a shot of being the second best team? Just giving that up to Quinnipiac at this point. I want to say Clarkson, but the way they've been playing, I'm not so sure. I think there's kind of a hat, to throw a few teams in. We didn't get to talk about Cornell earlier. I thought they looked fantastic against UMass. I'm not counting chickens on that. I'm going to knock on wood. But for not having played yet and for losing the amount of players that they had and people losing their head coach and people thinking they were going to take a step back, for them to come out and not playing their first games on the road at UMass against a team that played 8 games and played pretty well.
Yeah.
They dominated the first game and lost on a late power play goal and then won the second night. So I'll defer to other unbiased people on that, but I would put them right there in the mix.
I would say Cornell. Yeah, Cornell, Dartmouth, I think is still going to be good. Mm-hmm. Harvard impressed. We talked about that earlier. And I'm curious I'm really curious if Union is for real or not.
Yeah.
5-1-1. Have not played a very strong schedule. Mercyhurst, Niagara, RPI. They'll get into some meatier sections of their schedule coming up. With Clarkson, they play Lowell and UNH and Cornell in a couple of weeks. So it's going to get a little more difficult, and we'll kind of know, are they for real? Are they going to be in that top 4 or 5 tier, or are they going to be more, kind of in that second tier? So, so I'm kind of leaving them to the side for now, but we'll see with them.
From what I've seen of Clarkson, they can certainly be in that mix. I mean, that freshman Owen Van Steensel is definitely a great find, I think. And they have the Shane Soderwall in net, who's been okay. I mean, his numbers aren't great. He came from, what was it, D3 school last year, Curry, I believe.
Curry, yeah, I think they won a national championship, I think.
That's right. So, I think Clarkson's intriguing. I'm not sure if they'll be there, but they could be. I mean, it's not like you have other powerhouse teams, after Quinnipiac. So, all right, let's see. Chris asks, what team or teams outside the current top 3, and he's giving the top 3 as Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State. I don't know if he just means in the Big Ten, but I don't know if they are the top 3 teams in the country, but has had the strongest start to the season, in your opinion. We talked about one of them last week, Minnesota Duluth, who went to North Dakota and split, which I didn't think was too bad. I think that's pretty good coming off of the weekend at Minnesota. So I think they're in good shape. I mean, Denver had a blip this past weekend. First they lost to Northeastern, then they lost in overtime to Anchorage, and they just crushed them the next night. But I still think they're going to be up in the mix. So I don't know if any teams besides that have caught your eye so far.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in Duluth. We talked about Wisconsin earlier.
Wisconsin,
they're undefeated through 8 games. I think you got to throw them in there. And I agree with you in Duluth. And then, there's a bunch of teams that have really good records right now. But, again, Northeastern 5-1. But I look at a team like Miami, just kind of put Miami on the same spot I put Union. Like, we'll see as the schedule gets tougher whether or not that lasts.
Well, I will give Miami a lot of credit because they finally broke their schneid of a year and a half of not having won a league game, beating Arizona State. They had a close game the first night, but lost, and then they came back and beat them on Saturday. So, I thought the schedule they had played was just impossible to take anything out of, 6-0 against really lower-level teams. But Arizona State's probably middle of the pack.
100%.
And, so that was good. And like I said, you play those early games against maybe weaker opposition, but it gives you confidence.
It does. Yeah, and look, they needed that. I mean, that program needed an injection of confidence for sure. So,
and speaking of Miami, Kane asks, he's a Miami student. I actually have a Miami alum down the block from me. We were hanging out for Halloween this past weekend. I'm excited to see them ranked, but a little surprised Omaha is not in the top 20. Thoughts? Well, I'll tell Kane what I should just play like a recording. Like, do not pay attention to rankings. Boop. Because they're useless. So, don't even worry about what rankings are, Kane, because that's completely irrelevant and not worth talking about. So, but as far as we did talk about Omaha a bit, I think Miami being ranked is a little ahead of itself.
That's why I don't pay much attention to polls.
Yeah, I mean, Omaha, though, is an interesting story because, we've been talking about how, there's so much turnover on every team that we're not going to know. I mean, even though, like we just said about the NPI and stuff, how it might coalesce in November. I mean, this might be one of those years where we just don't know anything for a while. Because, what is Omaha? If they can get their defense figured out, all this turnover, maybe that comes together, because they have other pieces. But I don't know right now.
I don't know either. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's more mystery this year than really any year that I can remember recently, just because of there's so much turnover everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see. There's a lot of teams we're still on wait and see mode on. And, what is UConn, Maine, BU, or even Providence? What are those teams? There's a lot of question marks and a lot of good things.
A lot of question marks with a lot of Hockey East right now. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, is there any team in Hockey East where you're like confident? I mean,
no.
To reach the Frozen Four kind of thing,
No.
I have no idea.
Not right now. No.
Yeah. So, we also had another question asking about some of the top uncommitted players to watch this year in the USHL and Major Junior. I mean, you're asking the wrong guy on that. I don't know. You have a better handle sometimes than I do. We do have our guy Jordan, who's been doing some recruiting stuff for us. We should have him on maybe soon to talk about that stuff. But
yeah, I haven't paid enough attention to it yet. I start to look into more of that stuff like around the holiday break when there's no games for a couple of weeks. I watch the World Juniors and I kind of catch up on who are the next wave of recruits coming. So
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, keep an eye out. We do have a Recruit Watch page on College Hockey News. You can keep an eye on for that kind of thing. And Jordan's got his rankings of guys who already are committed. So, yeah, that's that as far as listener questions. A good crop of questions this week. Keep the cards and letters coming, as they say. And quickly, what's coming up this weekend for the slate as we're getting into November, deep in, and mostly the league games. The main UMass one is we're just talking about two of those teams. I didn't even mention, BU. I said Maine, UConn, Providence, UMass, another one. I mean, they look pretty good too.
Yep.
I didn't even mention Boston College in there. So, Maine, UMass is going to be a good test for those teams. And I'm trying to think what else. I know Cornell's at Harvard. That's always a beauty. So that should be interesting.
Penn State, Michigan State's probably the headliner.
Yeah, I was definitely getting down to that on the list here.
Yeah, there's a couple of others too. Like there's some sneaky good series this weekend too.
Oh, Denver's at Western Michigan.
Yep, that's a good one. There was a couple of others that I saw earlier today that I was like, oh, you know what, that'll be interesting.
Wisconsin at Michigan's another one.
That's the one I saw, Wisconsin and Michigan. There you go. I felt like between Denver and Western and Michigan State, Penn State, I'm like, geez, nobody's talking about Michigan and Wisconsin. That's going to be a really good series too.
Oh, absolutely.
Basically, yeah, most of the Big Ten this weekend will be pretty good.
So those are the big games. Obviously, yeah, that's the Big Ten dominates a lot of that right now, and those NCAA. I mean, North Dakota. Where is it? North Dakota at Omaha. See how that plays out. St. Cloud at Minnesota, Duluth. I mean, all those. These are all great series. So.
Yeah, they should be across the board. I mean, there's some big ones this weekend. Even that Omaha series, like you said. I mean, can they defend better, and what do they start to look like? I mean, that's a big test for them. Big test for them.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that will wrap things up for this week as the clock winds down. And good chat with Tim Danahy. And check out collegehockeynews.com for all the latest. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of the College Hockey News Insiders Podcast. To submit your listener questions, please send them to @CHN News on X. And for the best college hockey content around, including features, the CHN Team of the Week, stats, rankings, and so much more, visit us at collegehockeynews.com. Until next time, we hope you enjoy all of this week's great on-ice action, and we'll be back to break it down on our next edition. For Adam Woden and Mike McMahon, this has been the College Hockey News Insiders Podcast.